Thank you for um, accepting this interview. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Nicholas Reeders. I've been a university coordinator and lecturer for about 25 years, primarily in Sydney and a little bit in Shanghai. My main expertise is in business, so primarily marketing, management, strategy, e-commerce, entrepreneurship, a little bit in the schools of accounting and also project management. Currently in the School of Entrepreneurship and run a consulting company as well.
All right, sure. Thank you. Uh, so um, Today I'll be interviewing you on for my news reporting assignment, which I'll be doing on how can universities support student entrepreneurship and why they should support entrepreneurship. I'll be asking you some questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start. Why do you believe it's important for universities to actively support student entrepreneurship?
Yep, and thank you for sending the questions across. I have made some notes, so if you find my eyes are darting away from the camera, just bear with me.
Yeah,
So,
no problem.
look, I think we're definitely in a culture of creativity now. AI is coming thick and fast, and that's going to change a lot of the jobs for a lot of people. The Industrial Revolution changed blue collar jobs. AI is absolutely going to decimate white collar jobs. So by supporting student entrepreneurship, again, because when you're young, you can take a lot more risks in life. You can start to develop these problem solving abilities. You become resilient to people saying no. You build a growth mindset. And for universities to help students become entrepreneurs, you still need to put some of the basic building blocks into someone's brain. Because I find a lot of the entrepreneurs, especially on some of the social platforms, there's just a lot of hot air. So helping students take their ideas, turn them into successful ventures, creates jobs and obviously creates economic growth. And then at the same time, the students have a lot more of an impact on society, but end up doing better in the subject because they're actually applying that real life experience to the university theoretical aspects and underpinnings.
Right. Okay. How can student entrepreneurship contribute to the overall reputation and competitiveness of the university?
I think students pick universities as brands, and therefore, as a student, if I'm shopping around between universities, assuming I have the marks to get in, this builds the reputation. So you've got things like accreditation by different industry bodies. So I used to sit on the board of the Australian Marketing Institute and set up the university accreditation program. What we did and what we still do is go around and accredit universities on their marketing degrees. And you find this is now standard practice for management and project management and accounting, etc. So therefore, this builds the reputation of the university, which then students think, I want to do business, I want to become an entrepreneur, where should I go? And that then builds the brand. So obviously, if students are successful, we all know the story of Bill Gates and the Google founders, etc., being at university, and even though they dropped out in some way, shape, or form. A lot of them did actually do studies before. You need to remember they got into these very high-level branded universities first, which are very, very hard to get into. So by universities pushing for entrepreneurship, especially within their student body, you then you nurture talent. You have graduates who can make a tangible impact on society. This strong record of student entrepreneurship then attracts the next set of student entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs. So you have this vortex of continual growth within the system. You then have an entrepreneurial ecosystem on campus. So a lot of the universities now have some sort of think lab or entrepreneurial lab where students who want to do something can go. And a lot of these students are doing things in their own time as well. You then have connections between the university, industry, associations, the startup community, and therefore that builds the reputation for the universities as well, and for students to pick that university in regards to trying to build something from scratch as an entrepreneur.
All right. Um, and I know that you're teaching a course on entrepreneurship. So why do you think universities should have such courses?
And look, there's definitely an argument that you can't teach entrepreneurship, um, and I agree with parts of it as well. I think entrepreneurship is part of someone's personality, risk factors, and how comfortable they are with risk and grit and all the stuff you see online. So I think you need to teach people the basic building blocks of business. And without those building blocks, it's very difficult for a business to succeed and go past its first year. So you teach the students these theoretical concepts, you give them some practical tools, basic business planning, marketing, financial management, return on investment, minimal, minimal viable product, and then they start to think critically. You can point them towards things like IP Australia and patents and trademarks and getting an understanding of that, licensing deals. So if they do want to become an entrepreneur, at least they have some sort of understanding of the basic principles. And most importantly, it helps them actually identify a market that is actually there.
All right. Okay. So, in your opinion, what role should mentorship play in university support for student entrepreneurship?
Look, I think mentorship is very important. The Australian Marketing Institute, which I'm still part of, we have mentors for marketers, and I think for a student who wants to become an entrepreneur, learning from others is important. It's a two-way relationship though. So a lot of the feedback from the mentors is that the mentees don't really put a lot of effort into it. So it's very important. Experienced mentors, guidance, insights, knowledge. You have connections. They can help you so much. They can refine your ideas as a student. They can help you make choices that are smart, and it'll open doors and partnerships and resources, maybe even potential investors. But at the same time, I think university students need to lift their game, to put it bluntly, and really value the time of mentors, because obviously mentors are taking their time out of their day to help someone else. And it's definitely that part of giving back which I think becomes very important, but it needs to be valued, and therefore students need to prep for their mentors as much as being a good mentee is also important.
All right. Okay. So, what measures can universities take to incorporate entrepreneurship education into their curriculum?
I think universities need to start looking globally, especially linking back into some of the growth combinators like Y Combinator overseas. There's quite a few entrepreneurial groups in Australia as well. So I think those bonds need to be quite big. You need to have guest lecturers in who have built businesses from scratch. Now, a lot of the research is entrepreneurs come from primarily middle class and above family backgrounds, which reduces risk of failure. So finding entrepreneurs that have come from pretty much nothing is quite difficult, but makes for amazing stories. So linking back into these growth combinators, but also bringing in real world people who have actually done it and risked it all, and have put it on the line, I think is important. Linking back into YouTube, so I use a lot of YouTube videos. I'm currently doing a deep dive into Alex Hormozi, so pulling lessons from people that have done it. There's multiple competitions out there run by a lot of the corporations. There's lots of networking events, and I don't think it's the issue of universities not doing enough. I think the issue is students actually not doing enough and putting themselves out there. So, for example, at the university that I'm currently at, We have quite a lot of events for students to apply to come and meet entrepreneurs and businesses, etc., etc. And generally the turnout is not what you'd expect. You'd actually expect it to be people lined up against the wall and hanging from the rafters, and that just doesn't happen.
Hmm. Okay. So, what kind of initiatives or programs can universities develop to help students validate and scale their entrepreneurial ventures?
Um, so I think that there are already quite a few. So there's again, access to incubators and accelerators, mentors. There's workspaces where students can go in. Students have also a lot of resources. So, for example, you would have access to all the university library databases, which cost an absolute fortune, which a lot of corporations, as they get larger, can pay for and access. But if you're a small business, you're not spending the thousands and thousands of dollars for a single report. So students actually have quite a lot of resources in regards to that sense. You've got
Mhm.
staff on site that you can go and chat with staff. They have a lot of pitch competitions, both within the universities and out of the universities. So in Sydney, there's something called StartCon. Unfortunately, COVID changed a lot of the landscape, but StartCon was a huge corporate pitching VC funded event where you had startups talking about everything and anything, and students could get cheap tickets. And I would go to these things every time they were on, and I would say to my university students, you should be going. And I remember seeing one student over the, I don't know, half a decade that I was there. So I think there are definitely programs out there. I think universities need to maybe market them a lot better. You can incorporate going to these events as part of the marking rubric, but then that becomes difficult because you've got AACSB accreditation, so that gets quite messy. So there are links out there to external organisations. I think universities just need to publish those links a little bit more, and also at the same time, maybe universities need to become a little bit more entrepreneurial and change the way they look at education, which I think is starting to happen as well.
Okay. So, what do you think are the potential positive outcomes for students themselves when universities support their entrepreneurial aspirations?
So you get the practical skills and experience of actually building something from scratch. You learn to apply theory. You learn to pivot and think on your feet, because generally maybe your first idea was not that great. You build resilience. You build your personality. So I say to my students, for example, that to put it bluntly, if you don't like talking in front of people and presenting, then why you're doing business, because business is a lot about communication and the ability to stand up in front of a crowd and be comfortable and speak on the dime about a topic that you know something about is a skill set that industry just expects. So and then again, there are places like Toastmasters that students can go to for free. There are lots of videos online. Some of the universities in interstate and overseas actually have their own Toastmaster clubs within the universities because they're so big. So by by kind of becoming I guess an entrepreneur as a student, you you build this mindset of how do I solve problems, which can be valuable in any career path, whether you're an employee, an entrepreneur, or an entrepreneur, and this then builds businesses, and that's kind of what's important, because Australia is a place built on small businesses. This builds strong alumni networks. So, think of the alumni networks of Harvard, etc. And that's why I think LinkedIn is so important for students to be on. And therefore, if students do well, they give back to their university, and that just starts a spiral of successful future generations.
All right. Um, so, how do you believe universities can foster an entrepreneurial mindset among students?
So I think what, and I might just move the camera to make it a bit easier. Is that any better?
Yep.
Better? Okay. Okay, so what can they do? Well, the issue is how do you how do you disassociate a marking rubric from an entrepreneurial subject to let students take risks without failing subjects? So it's hard in that sense, because you have government bodies that control accreditation, and they're mindful of how do you test someone if they're a good entrepreneur. So you need some sort of educational activities within the lectures and the tutorials. Building something from scratch. It's things like entrepreneurial subjects, which obviously I'm teaching in, and they're generally a first kind of foray into the industry. Workshops, mentorship programs, I think real world challenges. So for example, you could set up an assignment of, you have $100 and you need to build the best hot dog stand. Where do you start from scratch? We talked about innovation labs and maker spaces, so that's where students can get free access to resources, and universities generally want some sort of cut of the pie as well. Totally understandable, because you're using someone else's resources. Guest lecturers are important. Again, when I was in one of my subjects of project management, which was project management methodologies, looked at multiple different ways of managing a project, and I'm quite a different type of coordinator and lecturer. I'm very, very practical minded, and what I did is my lectures were pre-recorded, and the 2-hour lectures became guest lecturers of one guest lecturer at minimum per week, sometimes 2. So over a semester I had, I think, 15 different guest lecturers. We had site visits on site of construction sites, and therefore it's just purely industry professionals all the time. On the flip side, in the student feedback, students complained because they had to do too much work, and they said it was unfair that they had to not only listen to someone from the real world during the lecture, but then they had to listen to a 2-hour lecture that was full of content and theory. So I think part of it is there's got to be a mindset shift in students of, it's going to be hard work to be an entrepreneur. It's not going to be easy. The world is not going to fall at my feet. I'm not going to do 4 hours of work a week and become a successful business owner or a multi-millionaire. So I think part of what universities need to do is also help students shift in that mindset. And this is why the argument of, are entrepreneurs born versus made? And the research is they are actually made. But you need to be comfortable with risk. You need to be, as a student, happy to go above and beyond. And I think, I've been teaching for 25 years, and there's definitely a shift in the level of work and commitment. So you find some students who are really entrepreneurial will just grind continually and just love the process.
All right. Okay. So, how can student entrepreneurship enhance the educational experience and, complement traditional academic learning within a university?
Sorry, just say the question again.
How can student entrepreneurship enhance the educational experience and complement traditional academic learning within a university?
It builds practical skills. So universities are primarily theoretically based, unless you have a very different type of course coordinator out there who makes it hands-on. And I've always been one of those. And remember, universities are quite bureaucratic as well. So by bringing on that very practical industry-linked type of focus, that's really where it's at when it boils down to it, because you can teach people theory, but until they can actually apply it, go through the processes, fail, pivot, look at market sizes, maybe the student's idea is not even in the right market. There's the argument of, build a better mousetrap and they will come. That's also been disproven. So I think it becomes this issue where universities need to still have, obviously, texts and readings, etc., but start to combine a lot more of the practical world. After COVID, we all got used to online Zoom lectures. So I think that combination of guest lecturers who talk about the practical applications of whatever, and entrepreneurship can be huge. It can be any industry, any field, any product, any service. Combining that then with the academic rigor of theoretical underpinnings, I think, is the way to go.
Okay. So, what other types of resources can universities provide to support student entrepreneurs?
Look, I think universities could probably open up access to more of the academics. Keep in mind, academics, universities have become corporatized, so academics are now running off their feet. And at the same time, I think there has to be something in it for kind of everyone, because I I say, I get asked for advice quite a lot, and people will say, I'll buy you a coffee, and I say to them, well, I think my time's worth more than a coffee. So sure, I'm happy to come in for sweat equity, but I'm not going to give you advice for free. So, and that's where I think the mindset change and shift of maybe I don't know everything and maybe I can't do it all, which is generally what the entrepreneurial kind of journey is sold as,
Mm-hmm.
needs to change a little bit of maybe some part of the pie is better than 100% of no pie. So I think universities could open up access to academics and uh, programs a bit more. And then at the same time, the universities will probably want a cut of whatever idea that is, which I think is also fair enough, because if you were doing this in a corporate workplace, you wouldn't own any of your own IP because you're doing it at a corporate workplace and they own everything you do.
Okay. Um, so what are the strategies that universities can implement to connect students with external networks, investors, and industry professionals?
So I think universities can point students to places like the hubs, StartCon, like we talked about, the combinators. Um, you've got to also look at where the funding is, and that's on a global level, and which governments are really pushing for entrepreneurship. Um, why do so many Australians just leave and head overseas to start up? Um, we have laws that are a bit draconian in this aspect. The US has very different laws in regards to startup businesses, and that's why you find, for example, a lot of small entrepreneurial businesses, um, will head overseas. Sometimes it's the born global argument of starting straight away where your biggest market is. Other times, I mean, you've got companies like PayPal and Canva that started here, but they've all ended up overseas because that's where the markets are. So I think what we need to do is think more on a global focus versus an Australian or state focus.
Hmm. Okay. So, um, what examples or success stories that you can provide where universities have benefited from supporting student entrepreneurship?
That's a good question because I'm now at a new university. Um, so look, the only ones I can think of are unfortunately overseas based. Um,
Oh, okay.
so for example, look, a lot of the US universities will give access to students for resources and then take a cut. So again, the Google founders, um, Bill Gates breaking in and using the computer software and the computer hardware at his university. Um, and look, there probably is successful stories from universities helping students in Australia. Um, Oh, actually, no, there is. So when I was at the University of Technology, Sydney, they had a big lab and a big ecosystem built around entrepreneurship, and there was quite a few success stories. I think one was something within the building industry that would help builders catalog on-site safety issues. That became quite successful. Another one was drones and piloting and licensing issues with insurance linked into it. So there have been a few, but you kind of have to look really deep for these types of things, because I think at the same time Australia has this tall poppy syndrome where we like people who get ahead, but we don't like people who get ahead. Very different to the US, where they'll rally around entrepreneurs and businesses, and instead of looking at someone who drives, I don't know, a Lamborghini and a Ferrari and going, God, I don't like that person, I'm jealous and envious. I think we need to switch the mindset of how did that person get there? What can I learn from them?
Yeah.
And will they teach me something? Of can I learn versus why should you have it and I don't? So a lot of it is a mindset shift.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So how can supporting student entrepreneurship contribute to the diversification and expansion of universities network and alumni community?
So I think entrepreneurs, once they become big and successful, can start linking back to multiple universities then. And what I mean by that is a successful entrepreneur for any university going back to and talking about what they've learned provides practical knowledge to students.
Yeah. Okay. So what potential collaborations or partnerships can arise between universities and business community through supporting student entrepreneurship?
So I think again, you've got mentorship, you've got industry expertise and guidance, you've got placements for students. So students can then start going into those business communities, and that means you have a very different type of viewpoint coming in from someone who's generally a lot younger. A lot of the family businesses are still stuck in the past, unfortunately. So you have someone coming in with new ideas and new knowledge. This issue of AI, I don't know if are you playing at all with artificial intelligence at all, like chat or anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's going to change a lot of the landscape for a lot of businesses. So businesses are going to have to become very entrepreneurial very quickly. Otherwise, I think they're going to go the way of the dodo bird. So by having students, partner and work within the business community, even if it's going in over your summer break, it's a whole new fresh set of eyes of maybe there's a different way of doing it, maybe there's a better way, and then at the same time that might give a job to the student when they finish, but it gives them definitely practical experience. And at the same time, the universities benefit because that could be where the business owner decides to go back and maybe do a short course on some sort of business focused area where they think, okay, you know what, I probably do need to catch up in my learning. So I know the university that I'm at now, and actually every other university has a lot of short courses where business people can go in and try and upskill themselves in regards to leadership or data or AI or marketing or management or whatever it is. And I think that's where there is definitely a market for that. There's also a lot of providers that do this as well. So again, it's not just, I think, educating students. I think we need to look at it and go, we are students for life, and we continually actually should be learning all the time.
Yeah.
And if you sit there and think, I now know it all, then that's quite scary. So there's I'm assuming you've heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and for me, the more I learn, the more I realize how little I actually know.
Okay. So in your view, what's the long-term value for universities in supporting student entrepreneurship?
So I think the long-term view is you build society up as an educational institution. So there's a lot of facets to it. You get the reputation of the university. The university becomes more competitive. Again, universities can still take out patents from faculty. You build this environment where students want to go there because you have staff who have done more, both in an academic sense and also in a real world sense as well, and understand how the real world works, because textbooks are great, but they're still textbooks. It builds the university's track record and brand recognition. That builds the standing. That builds then students go, I'll pick that university versus other universities. So I think it becomes then a self-fulfilling prophecy and a cycle that that builds upon itself.
Hmm. So, in your opinion, what are the key challenges universities may face in supporting student entrepreneurship, and how can they overcome them?
I think it's definitely going to be AI. Um, and I think that's going to be a challenge for everyone. So, and we're only starting to see the beginning of it. So I've been doing quite a bit of reading and research and listening to a lot of different areas in AI. And I think once quantum computing really kicks in, I don't even know what the challenges are going to be. I think we're looking into a crystal a crystal ball and a black hole of a new different type of world. I think we need to let people be more creative. We need to let people fail. And again, that's part of the ecosystem of Australia, that we're not built in helping entrepreneurs fail, because here, if you go bankrupt as a company director, it's such a huge black mark against your name that it's really scary. Versus in the US, they look at failure in a totally different way. So we teach it's okay to fail, and we talk about, fail fast, fail hard, and fail often, and learn from those failures. But the whole ecosystem in Australia is not built for this at all. It's, if you fail here, you're kind of out of the system for a few years because there's this horrible black mark. Versus in the US and other parts of the world who really foster entrepreneurship, you can fail and start up again. So I think we need to get involved with not only just the university aspect, but also the government aspect as well needs to change to actually help entrepreneurs. Um, I think some of the other challenges are industry professionals, again, are now dealing with AI, so they're concerned about what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen with jobs. Um, a lot of education is I can go to YouTube and pretty much learn anything for free anyway. But I still need that bit of branded paper from a university to prove that I can think critically. So I think students now have it even harder in that sense, because you've got someone out there who is just spending all their time learning as much as they can, and that's going to be, a student who is at university getting okay grades. Do you need HDs? Not really. Does the real world care about your marks? Not really. Not once you have your first job. So you need to get through. I think the argument of P's get degrees is maybe not the best way to go, but you need a decent GPA. But what's more important as a student is the ability to think critically and understand whether that research that you're reading is great or just totally useless. So again, looking at validity of source, etc. But at the same time, having an open mind to look at where is that next new kind of market and what's coming. So I think the challenges, I think some of them we can already see, and some of them as humans we don't even know what they are. If you look at companies like Boston Dynamics with Atlas, the robot that can now basically do parkour and manipulate its environment to get around, that's going to kill off factory work. You've got self-driving cars. The trucking industry in the US is a huge employer. You don't need truck drivers anymore. They're unskilled labor. You're not going to bother retraining them. So the reading I've done in AI, this is like how the internet changed the world, but it's going to be bigger. So I think we're not ready yet. I think a lot of us have got our heads stuck in the sand and we're hoping that it'll go away. And I think there's going to be changes across everywhere. And I think universities and industry and governments will adjust and change. It'll be the ones who change very quickly and can pivot, which again is a part of being an entrepreneur. So universities who can pivot and change and adapt very quickly, and I think a lot of them did, especially with COVID. You could see how they went to online learning very quickly, but at the same time, for example, I would run university lectures and I would be the only one with a camera on, and I would say to my students, well, if I've got the camera on, and you can't force students to have the cameras on either, but at the same time you sit there and think, well, you're doing business, and if you're not comfortable on Zoom now, good luck in the real world when everyone just expects you to actually be there and be paying attention and have opinions on the dime. So, and look, this still happens in the corporate world as well. It's not that much different where I think some people are comfortable being out there, but the mindset of entrepreneurs, I think, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to be able to sell. You need to be able to sell your product, your service. You definitely need to be able to sell yourself. You've got to be able to present. You've got to be comfortable on camera, off camera, presenting in front of a room of 1 to 1,000. You need to know your content, because I think if you don't, then people will call you out very quickly on that as well. But I obviously, I network quite a lot, and I think the research of entrepreneurs is, yes, they do have a bit of dark traits in them, absolutely. They can be charismatic when they need to, and they are still things you can teach. EQ can be taught, but having the mindset of I need to upskill myself as a student. Keep in mind we've got more students now that have graduated out of universities in the whole history of time before. There's a lot of uni students out there with a lot of bits of paper, and you now need more than just your bit of paper. So I've always said to my students, you need to start up a club at university and become the president. You need to get involved in clubs. You need to do stuff outside of the university, because that going to university is no longer enough. In 2 generations, or even 1 generation before, if you had a uni degree and a bit of paper, you guaranteed you had work. And this is me using a lot of the stuff out of Ken Robinson of do business schools, or do schools kill creativity? But now it's a lot harder to get work. So I think we look at, say, our parents and grandparents who had it very differently, where a lot of the population had not gone through universities. They had it a lot easier in regards to finding work. There was a lot more opportunities in the West, because the West was nowhere near as what it is like today. I say to my students, maybe your job is not going to be in Australia, so be prepared to move and go where the work is and learn the work culture there, and also the actual culture. Do reading up on things like Hofstede, so have an understanding of different cultural aspects, and realize that companies have enough people to choose from. So it's even the entrepreneur at work who will work on their normal job and then do things outside of their job. That's exactly what companies are looking for. And Lockheed Martin had skunk works and threw their engineers in a tent and said to them, go build this, we'll leave you alone. So I think smart companies have always been entrepreneurial, and still are. Companies that are not generally end up dying off, and you hear the stories of the Kodaks, etc. So I think a lot of the universities are quite entrepreneurial, and some of the students are as well. And look, you get a lot of entrepreneurs come in and they go, I dropped out of university. You've got to look at then the background of that entrepreneur. What was the fail safe for them? Did they have a family that could look after them if it all went pear-shaped? Did they maybe they dropped out, but maybe they did other courses and other studies. So a lot of people quote Steve Jobs and say, well, Steve dropped out of uni. Sure, he did, but he was actually still at university going to other courses. Again, he might have sat in on a calligraphy course, so-called illegally as a student, but he still went to courses that actually interested him. And keep in mind, it wasn't just him. He was a great marketer and a great salesperson and really understood products really well. But Steve Wozniak kind of built the first hardware system for Apple. So I think it's like a partnership is the way you've got to look at it. The universities have done quite a lot in my opinion. I think industry has done quite a lot as well, because obviously if you're an entrepreneur and you build a business and you employ people, you help the community, you put people in jobs, you pay taxes, lovely for the government, good for all of us. I think a lot of it is also part of students going, holy moly, am I doing enough as a university student if I want to be an entrepreneur? And then number two, am I doing enough as a university student if I want to be an employee and also be, an entrepreneur at work? But at the same time, the culture of work has to foster that entrepreneurship as well, and maybe give something back to the to the employee. So Google's now famous 20% time, where you can work a day of the week on your own product. And they've changed that a little bit, but basically, if you built something amazing at Google, you got a cut of it, which for anyone who's smart, that makes sense. If I'm smart, and I bring something to my workplace and I'm working for an employer, I want some of that pie, because if I'm coming up with all these amazing ideas and my employer benefits and all I'm getting is still my normal salary, why would I work harder? What's in it for me? So I think a lot of the companies that have got it right have actually given back and said to employees, you know what, if you come up with something amazing, even though you're using our resources, which is, again, the Google story, if you worked at Google, you'd never have access to those resources in your whole life unless you worked there. So it's fair enough that Google should take the big proportion of the chunk, but there's multiple stories of people working at Google coming up with great ideas and becoming millionaires overnight.
Mm. Okay. So we're on to the last question. So what impact can student entrepreneurship have on a local or regional economy, and why should universities play a role in fostering this impact?
Look, I think it has a huge positive, significant impact. So on say a state-based level, you have people want to stay in that state, so that's important because you need population. Those people are consumers across the board. It helps the economy by creating new businesses. You have job creation, you have economic growth, you've got taxpayers, you've got a stimulation of innovation, so the local ecosystem gets better. So, for example, in the US, you've got Silicon Valley, but a lot of people are moving to, where is it? I think Nashville or Texas. So you've got a lot of the, places will try to become the place for entrepreneurship, if that makes sense. And then they get so busy and so big and so expensive that it's really difficult to set up there. So I think it is Texas, because I know Tim Ferriss moved there, and there's a huge ecosystem around it. So there's definitely a huge, significant social and financial impact in the area, because you have these entrepreneurs who come up with disruptive ideas. They solve problems, new services, new industries. Imagine where we would be now without Uber or Airbnb. And then again, at the same time, those companies started out totally illegally, and governments just didn't even know what to do and how to catch up. So I think universities can also help that role by helping entrepreneurs navigate this super complex system of government regulations as well, helping entrepreneurs set up the right way initially, I think is also important as well. And overall, you just help this whole ecosystem of economic development in the community, and then on a countrywide level, and then globally, so you get better quality of life.
Yeah. All right. Okay, that's the last question. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to speak to me on this.
Pleasure. So what happens with this thing? What do you do next?
So basically, it's a news report that I have to do for my news reporting course. So the topic is student entrepreneurship, and I have to interview 3 sources for this. So yeah, the audio or the video, I don't have to show it to my professor. I would just, like I said, I would transcribe it and write it into my news report.
Nice.
Yeah.
Happy that I could help.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking to me on this. Also, before before you leave, do you happen to know any student entrepreneurs or any students in your class that would like to speak to me too?
I could. The only issue is my semester is actually just finished this week.
Oh,
Um, so look, what I'd recommend is, but that's all right. What I'd recommend is actually reaching out to the kind of there's Chalk and Stone. Um, they're quite good, but I mean they're primarily more corporate. I'd hit up the university Think Labs and the kind of entrepreneurial labs that they all have.
oh.
So you'll find, and I mean there's a whole heap of them. Are you limited to Australia or can you go globally?
I think Australia, just Australia.
Okay.
Yeah.
So look, I would, each of there's a huge startup ecosystem in Melbourne and Sydney. So Melbourne and Sydney basically have about 80% of the white collar jobs in Australia when it
Right.
really boils down to it. So if you're looking for this kind of thing, I would hit up the different universities in both Sydney and Melbourne. Queensland's quite huge as well. There's a few in Adelaide and a few in Perth and a few here and there, but I would start with Eastern Seaboard, and each of the universities has a huge ecosystem around entrepreneurship, and they're all university students, so they all have gone through the process of having to learn something and then at the same time build something from scratch and deal with failures. I would start there.
Okay.
Because you're obviously on LinkedIn, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, those are called Think Labs.
Well, I mean, they each brand themselves differently, but each university will have some sort of startup community
Oh,
hub built around it. So, each of the and I've taught at pretty much most of the universities in Sydney and also overseas in Shanghai. And if you just go onto a university website and type up startup lab or think lab or entrepreneur community, something like that, there's always something there that
okay.
I can't think of a single university that doesn't have one now.
All right. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yep. I
Pleasure.
will look it up. All right. So, yeah. Thank you for talking to me on this today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good day.